Good morning, everybody. This is Brian Ahern speaking from Evolphin Software, and I want to welcome you to the webinar Smarter Workflows with Adobe Plugins. We're grateful that you've attended, and we look forward to sharing some really exciting information, methods and processes with you. Today, we're going to demonstrate our plugins to the key Adobe CC applications. And our goal is to show you several ways to streamline, improve, and to build efficiencies into your work in progress workflows. Evan Michaels, who's our VP of Video Product Management at Evolphin, he's going to lead this particular part of the webinar. We're also thrilled to have Carl Soule from Adobe on this webinar. Carl's going to introduce you to Adobe Productions, and of course, together with Evan, Carl and Evan will highlight how Evolphin Zoom and Adobe Productions actually complement each other. So with no further ado, I am going to hand it over to Evan and to Carl, and I do hope that each of you enjoys the webinar. Evan?
Thanks, Brian. I'm Evan Michaels. My role at Evolphin is the VP of Video Product Management. And in a past life, I was a post-production supervisor at Time Inc., which is now Meredith. And some of what we'll be discussing today addresses a lot of the headaches that I had to deal with before we were using Evolphin Zoom, such as tracking down media, sending it places, making sure all the editors had access to it, and things like that. Carl, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure, thank you, Evan. My name is Carl Soule. I'm actually from the film and television team that's based down in Los Angeles, California. And our group is responsible for addressing features in the Adobe applications that specifically talk about and work with high-end post. So a lot of what we do has to do with turnovers and collaborative workflows.
Great. And so I'm going to dive into the webinar, and we'll have some live demos as well. But one of the key concepts that I'll be making here, one of the key points, is that users, with Evolphin Zoom, users don't need to know where the content is. They just work with it. And so what is Evolphin Zoom? Zoom is an AI-powered combination of a MAM, a DAM, and a PAM. You might have heard some of those industry terms. But what that means is it's going to be a central repository for all your media, but it's also going to help you in the work in progress of your creative workflow, and then what you do after it too. So it's going to streamline everything from ingestion, transcoding video, moving media where it needs to go, tracking versions, storing things securely, making sure everything is available to everyone on your team who needs it. But then also, once you're done with it, it can aid in publishing, sending the assets somewhere. If a video file needs to be published to an FTP site, for example, for broadcast, Zoom can automate that. It's basically, it lifts all of the burden that is normally part of the stages of media production and frees up the creatives to focus on doing what they do, which is being creative. It can be deployed on premises, in the cloud, or hybrid of the two. So we've been working with a lot of companies who want some cloud elements for remote workers, but then also need them to talk back to their on-premises elements. And so we can do that. What we're seeing here is a shot of our web client, which is viewable in any web browser on desktop and mobile. So you can view it anywhere, which helps remote teams. Our plugins to the Adobe apps are very robust, and we have plugins to 5 of the Adobe applications: Illustrator, InDesign, After Effects, Premiere, and Photoshop. We also have plugins for Cinema 4D and Sketch, which is a design program. But the point of these plugins is to remove frustration. Basically, the editors don't need to, excuse me, editors don't need to assemble their media from tons of emails or tons of sources. They can access it all right from within the plugin. So they can work faster, instantly search for what they need, drag and drop it into their project. With Zoom automatically tagging media with AI, It allows the editors to discover and find what they need. If there's a vast archive of media at a company and no one knows what's in it, AI can go in and tag everything so that it's suddenly searchable and discoverable and usable. Our plugins also allow you to share for review and approval and for publishing right from within the app. And our Premiere plugin allows you to switch between full res and proxy version of the media. And I'll be showing you that in a little bit. And then comments from the review and approval portal are also pushed back to the Adobe app. So the creatives don't need to switch between multiple apps or lose track of what they're doing. It's all from within the same plugin. So I'm going to hand the mic over to Carl, who's going to talk a bit about an exciting new feature of Adobe Premiere, which is Premiere Productions. Carl?
All right. Thank you, Evan. So just really quickly, the background on Productions. This was something that originated with our team down in Hollywood. And this is technology that we've been working on for the better part of 3 years. This was battle tested through a number of different feature films. As our team really looked at collaboration, and we've been looking at different options as far as collaboration is concerned, we did want to address just a common workflow that we have typically seen in Hollywood that involves using locks and breaking up a larger project into smaller bite-sized chunks that allow for different editors to be working on different pieces simultaneously and be able to keep the media kind of in a central repository. And so Productions is something that has actually evolved over the last few years. We're really excited to now have it available to the general public. That's kind of the charter of what our team does, is we will work closely with a small group of editors down here in Hollywood. But the goal is to generate features that everybody will have access to. And that's exactly what Productions are. If we can go to the next slide. Very, very quickly, the Premiere Pro project format hasn't changed, and there are still people that do smaller projects just using a single Premiere project file. But when you start getting into trying to work with multiple people, people start using multiple projects. Since a single project file is typically locked to one person editing it at a time, we've seen a lot of people over the years start breaking apart larger, like full-length feature films into multiple projects. And we rapidly realized we needed some sort of higher-level organization that allowed for these projects to kind of talk to each other, to have some sort of awareness about each other, so that you could do things like store all of your clips in one project and then have different editors that are referencing those clips. We call that cross-project referencing. And that is actually kind of the magic of Productions, and it's what really drives a modern workflow with Productions. And it's difficult to show with slides, so I'm going to just take a quick moment just to show you what this looks like. So let me very quickly share my screen here. And Evan, can everybody see my screen? Can you see my screen?
I can, yes.
Okay, wonderful. So very, very quickly, everything on the right-hand side of the screen should look familiar. This is standard Premiere Pro. It hasn't changed. What's new is this panel that I have kind of docked on the left-hand side here. This is something called the production panel. I've got a slider here where I can make the text bigger or smaller as necessary to fit things on the screen. And what this is organizing a production, and a production contains individual Premiere Pro projects. Every one of these different items that I see here are Premiere Pro project files. So the only thing that I see inside of the production panel are Premiere Pro projects and the folders and subfolders that contain those projects. Now, the magic of working inside of a production is you can break apart how you want to organize things, and you can put common elements in separate Premiere Pro projects that everybody can reference. So as an example, all of these daily projects, these represent all of the different media as the media was coming in during this production. This is where we've organized all the media. All the editors can open the production at the same time. All of the editors can then dive into the bits and pieces they want to work on. And so it creates a really nice organizational structure within Premiere Pro. I'm editing right now in a project called full edit aspect. This is what my project looks like. You can see there are no clips found inside of my project file. It's just the edits that I'm working on. This is true. I can also see at a glance that there's another editor named Mike Burton who's also cutting and working within this same production. Because there's no clips inside the project, and yet I have a timeline here that's got, you know, dozens and dozens and hundreds of different clips. Where do the clips actually live? Well, if I right-click on one of these clips and choose Reveal in Project, because this is a production, because all the projects stay linked under the hood, it takes me right to the project, and I can see in this case, this is the day 5 project, and I can see immediately that there's an alternate take that I could use here if I needed to. So by organizing using productions, it's really geared towards anybody who's dealing with long form work, with documentary work. It allows for an episodic series to be all contained within a single production, and then have folders for each episode, and then have within those folders for the acts, for the different bits of media. And it makes it very, very easy to, you know, for example, in a multi-episodic show, if I need to do a flashback to episode 1, I can simply, right from the production panel, go into episode 1 and pull what I need. So that's just a quick example of productions. I'm going to hand things back off to Evan, because with Evolphin, the plugins that Evolphin provides really complete the workflow. And I'm super excited to see these.
Thanks, Carl. Can you see my screen?
Yeah.
All right, great. So how do productions work with Evolphin Zoom? So productions in general require that all of the media and all the projects be on the, well, not all the media, but all the projects need to reside on the same shared storage. Which is great if you're in an on-premises environment, but what do you do when your workers are remote, or you started a production and then need to move it to be remote? Well, Evolphin Zoom can help with that. Basically, you use Evolphin Zoom's built-in locking mechanism, which complements Premiere's project locking. And through Zoom, you have the same media, the same sequence sharing. You're going to sync the projects using the Evolphin Zoom panel. And that way your productions can still be in a remote workflow and don't require them to be on premises. Now, if you are in an on-premises environment, you can certainly use productions out of the box with Zoom as well. But if you do want to move productions remote, Evolphin Zoom can help that. So what else does Evolphin Zoom do to power remote creative work? So it allows everyone, because it's a single central source of truth, it allows everyone to share assets, get the updated assets they need. If you have a designer in one state working with an editor in another, and that editor needs, you know, an animation, the designer can sync it with Zoom, and the editor can drag and drop it into their project. It's also going to not only sync those changes, but track every version of those changes too. So if someone makes a change that other people don't like, they can always roll it back. Or if you need to branch that project out to do a new sort of exploration of a concept, or to do a different design, you need 2 different versions of it. Zoom makes that super easy. And it's all in the same single source of truth, so everyone's on the same page. There's also built-in collaboration and review, which I'll show you in a little bit. And it allows you to publish that media too. So let's say an editor finishes their video in New York and they upload it to Zoom. The social media manager in LA can then publish it to social media from the Zoom platform, and it just makes it super easy. And that's all in a highly secure and managed environment. So let me show you a little bit of a live demo. This would be if a photographer in one part of the country or one part of the world needs to upload photos for an InDesign designer. So what they would use is they'd have our web client, and you can invite them to a collection that allows not only review and approval, but if someone has the permission to do so, it allows them to upload as well. So this is an easy way to get files from people who might not have a Zoom account. So let's say he has a few images here, like these doctor photos, and he needs to provide them to the designer. He just drags and drops to the web client, and they start uploading, and they are ingested into Zoom immediately. And then once he adds them, you can see that they are there, and the InDesign layout artist can refresh, or you can set it up to get notified when the assets are added, and they can add them to their project. So it's very easy. You just click Make Link, which imports it into InDesign as a link, and then you can place it into the document. Nice thing is, with it being a single source of truth, if the photographer did have Zoom access and they needed to update the metadata for the file, they could do that remotely, and then the InDesign artist could search for the file based on that metadata. And so you might be wondering, well, why do you need Zoom for this? Couldn't the photographer just email the photos or something like that? Well, imagine that the photographer was shooting all day and they have 1,000 photos. That would be hard to email. You'd need some sort of service to do it. But what if the InDesign user just needed a photo of a lab technician, but there's 1,000 photos and it would take forever to search through and find that lab technician? Well, you could have these photos automatically analyzed with AI. So then the InDesign user just searches for lab technician and they find the 5 photos that have that. And because everyone's on the single central repository, if the photographer updates the metadata for some of them, every single person every single coworker can access those files and find them, instead of chasing down, chains of email and, files in one location, another location. It can be a big mess. Whereas it's all in one location, everyone's on the same page. So that's nice for photos, but what about a remote video project? Because video files are very large. So we created a few ways to share media files depending on your needs. We have an automatic cloud sync, which copies media to the cloud in the background automatically so that anyone can access it. It has built-in file acceleration. We also integrate with file transfer tools like Aspera or File Catalyst if your organization uses those. Once media is added to the cloud, proxies are generated automatically, so you don't have to use your personal computer to be generating those proxies that people might need. If a camera op has uploaded media to S3, you can ingest directly from that bucket into Zoom, so you don't have to download it and then upload it again. Zoom can take care of that for you, and because it's transferring in the cloud, it's a lot faster than if you were just doing it on your own computer. And with our background sync, editors can work on the files while they're being uploaded, so there's no delay. And once the files are in the cloud, they can be analyzed by AI and made searchable to the rest of your coworkers. Other ways Zoom empowers video teams is, like I said, the proxies are generated automatically, and those proxies can be played in our web client from any device, from desktop or mobile. So, for example, if a producer needed to watch the raw footage, they needed to view the dailies, they could do that from an iPad or from their laptop. They could go through and pull selects, they could log the footage. An assistant editor could go through and tag key moments that they want out of a long video file for the editor to take. Or you could even have AI go through and analyze and tag key moments. So for example, you could have artificial intelligence analyze and find all of the goals, for example, in a soccer game. And then you could have a sequence generated automatically of just those goals, so your editor who has to make the highlight video is already halfway there with a rough cut created by AI. I'm going to show you that in a second, but one other thing I want to mention is that we also support live ingest, where you can edit while the footage is being recorded live and even tag it with AI as it's being recorded live. So let me show you our logging tool. And so let's say, for example, you had this basketball video. What we're looking at right here, this is our asset detail view in the web client. And so you can view the metadata for the asset, and then down here are our data timelines. So this is how we visualize time-coded metadata that's coming back from any source. It could be AI, it could be human-logged metadata, it could be an Opta feed if you subscribe to their service. And so let's say you wanted to come through and log some data, identify some points. Very easy with our web logging tool. I'm just going to hit I and O to set an in and out point and type the value. So I'm going to hit play, I, O, score. And I'm going to hit I, O, dribble, for example. And those data points are added immediately. So it's very easy to go through and log, and you can also play it back at 2 or 4 times speed so you can get through footage really fast. Now, how do you turn this into a sequence that the editor can use? We have our clipping option here, which you can either do based on in and out points, or you can do from the data timelines. So with the data timelines, you might select that you want the action data timeline, and you can create a sequence from just that data timeline, excuse me. So if I go into Premiere, I'm going to go and browse for the sequence that I created, and I'm going to click on this XML, and I'm going to import it. And I want to show you what that XML looks like. When I open the sequence, you can see that all the moments in the action data timeline have been added and cut, so the video is pre-cut, and markers have been added for each of those moments. So you can go through and use Premiere's search tools to search for a dunk and get it right there. And so it's very easy, just like that, to create a rough cut just for moments that were identified in the web client. Sneak peek at one of our new features coming out in the next version of our plugins. We're going to have the ability to import those data timelines as Premiere markers on the clip. So that way, if AI has gone in and identified faces or identified objects, or a human's gone through and logged key moments, you're going to be able to import those as clip markers in Premiere, so you can use Premiere's built-in marker tools to search and find what you need. So it's just another way that's going to make your workflow even faster using Premiere's built-in tools. So another way that Evolphin Zoom takes a lot of the headache out of media management is that it tracks every file used in every project. So if you have 100 or 1,000 video files used in a Premiere project, or a bunch of images used in a Photoshop document, it's going to track all of those assets that are in the Adobe project. And what that means is it helps you in a few ways. Number one, if you need to share the project with other people, you don't need to collect the project first. Your coworker can just check out the project with the links, which is a feature in Evolphin Zoom, which will then get that coworker all of the linked files that they need to do the project. So you don't have to worry about it. Zoom takes care of it for them. The other way it helps is with digital rights management, where let's say a video file or an image file had expired, the licensing ran out and you're no longer allowed to use it. And suddenly you have to replace it from a bunch of banner ads or some videos, and you don't know which projects have it and which projects don't. But with Zoom tracking where everything is used, all you have to do is click on the file and it'll show you all of the projects using it. So that way you only have to open those 5. You don't have to open 100 projects just to see if they're using the file that needs to be replaced. And once something is expired, Zoom will prevent people from using it as well. So you don't have to worry about people accidentally using something that they shouldn't. Also, all versions, as I've said, are securely tracked and stored, so you can always go back in time if someone makes a change you don't like, or if they used an asset that wasn't marked as expired, but they weren't supposed to use it, you can easily go back in time. So let me show what it looks like for Premiere Editor working with a designer. So for example, let's say we have this Photoshop document right here, which is our title card. And there's a designer working on that title card as well in another part of the country. So they can make their change to the title card, like let's make this text black, for example. And then what they would do is they would just need to sync their change with Evolphin Zoom. And then once that change is synced, the Premiere editor will get it in their system. So what I'm showing you right now is our check-in form. And what that does is it loads up all of the linked assets that are used in this project, and then will prompt me for metadata as well in case I need to apply any to this Photoshop document. We have required fields and optional fields, and you can set up what fields you're going to show here. This is entirely customizable. A bunch are already filled out because I've already synced this with the server, so that's why I don't need to fill out anything here. And when I hit check-in, it's going to look at the changes and only send the changes at the byte level to the server. So for example, this Photoshop document might be 10 or 20 megabytes, but the changes, the difference between this version and the last version was only 59 kilobytes. That's a service we call front-end deduplication. So what that means is, for me to sync these changes with the server, I only had to send 59 kilobytes to Zoom, and then the Premiere editor, who's going to sync those changes back down, would only have to download 59 kilobytes to see those changes. Now, of course, we see the change here because I'm on the same computer, but if we went to the linked files tab, they would see they'd see a red dot because this thing is has been modified and they need to download their new change, and they can do it right from the linked file tab, or when they go to the home tab and hit sync, they're going to get the updated file. That is how a Premiere editor can work with a designer, and they don't need to be in the same location to get the same stuff. Let me show you the Premiere editor switching proxies. So you can see here in our linked file tab, it has all of the assets that are in this project, and our low-res proxies have a watermark burned in, so that's another feature of Zoom. You can have watermarks added for security if you want. And so let's say this editor needs to switch from low-res to high-res. I can just click on the file. It has this icon here telling me that I have access to the high-res. It's mounted on my computer or downloaded. And so when I hit the high-res button, it's just going to swap it out. So you can see that the watermark disappeared because it is now pointing to the high-res. But also our proxies are frame accurate. So none of the edit points changed, none of the frame sizing changed. So you don't have to worry about messing up your edit switching between proxy versions. The great thing about our proxy workflow is for people who might have a bad internet connection and can't download the full res, they can just work with the proxies, and if they are downloading the full res in the background, they can switch to the full res when the download is done, or if the full resolution has been archived and they need to restore it, you can edit, and you need to update an old project. You can edit that old project using the proxies while the restore is happening, so you don't have to wait for the restore to complete. And so the point is that these proxy files are a lot smaller and a lot easier to deal with, but they don't change your editing workflow at all. When you're done, you can, and let's say you don't have access to the full res, but you're done with your edit with the proxies, you can sync your project with Zoom, and a coworker who does have access to the full res can open your project and do the swap, or you can even remotely export the video in the cloud. If the high res is stored in the cloud, you can perform the export for your project from the cloud with the high res. So there are a lot of options there for people who don't have access to the full res but still need to do their edits. So let me show you one other thing in Premiere, which is the review and approval workflow. And so let's say I was done with my edit and I wanted to export it. You can choose an export preset, whether to use in and out points, and hit export, and it will save this video file it'll export this video file using Media Encoder. In our other apps, we also have an exports tab, but in Photoshop, you would export an image file instead of a video file. So all 5 of our plugins have these export tabs that allow you to share for review and approval. And once it's exported, you can automatically sync it to a collection in the cloud. So let me show you what that looks like. We have our city promo collection here that I've been invited to. And when I click the file, I can watch the video. And so if it needs to be reviewed by a producer who's remote, or by even the client who's somewhere else, you can invite them to the collection. They can watch the video and they can leave comments. So if we've got a couple comments I added here previously, but let me add a new one like, please write in this shot, for example. Now, once that comment is made, it is time code accurate. So it stores its location and time on the video file. And the Premiere editor is going to get a little notification that there's a comment that's been made on this exported file. So when they go in and view the export, they're going to see those comments that were made. So we have 3 comments here. One of them has been resolved. So if we go to resolved, that was an earlier one I made when testing this demo. But if we go to unresolved, here's the one I just made. When we click on it, we can see that it's added right there. And now if the editor wanted to make these changes, you can create markers from the comments, which will add them to your sequence. So that way you don't have to wonder what the person was talking about. And then once you're done with that, you can mark it as resolved, which makes the comment list sort of serve as a to-do list. And you can also reply, which one do you want? Question mark. And then hit save. And you can have a back and forth conversation too. Now, I see that right here I'm talking to myself, which is kind of funny because as this webinar is going, I'm kind of also talking to myself. But obviously, in the real world, you would have other people logged in and the conversation happening that way. So you can see that my comment was pushed to the web client. You can see that the reply and me marking it as resolved was also pushed to the web client. So it's an instantaneous communication. The collaboration happens in real time. The producer or client does not need to leave the web client, and the editor does not need to leave Adobe Premiere. So it's very easy to collaborate, have that back and forth, and then once you're done, you just do another export and get it approved. So very, very easy to collaborate and saves a lot of time by not having to switch between 3 different services. So last thing I wanted to show you was for any of our current customers who might want some tips and tricks with our plugin. I talked about all the major features of the plugin, but in case you weren't aware, there are a few more options up in what I believe the industry term is this hamburger menu. We have a few other options that you can do with your project if you click this menu. One, you can revert the project. So if you've made a bunch of changes, but you don't like what you did, you can click revert, which restores your version of the project to the one that was last synced with Zoom. So it'll just reopen it in here. If you want to clone the project to either do an experiment or you've opened someone else's project and you want to branch off and do your own, you can click clone and it'll create a new copy. And you can click resolve links. Resolve links is when you've opened someone else's project and you need the linked files to point to where they are on your computer instead of the file paths on theirs. And so it automatically repoints them and reconnects them for you. We're going to have a huge update to this capability in our next release, where resolve links will be even more powerful with better tracking on where those assets are. So even if you've got a weird edge case scenario of where the assets have been moved to, resolve links will be even more powerful and we'll figure it out. The last thing I'll show you is reload properties. That's for if you've changed preferences on the server or on your computer and you want to refresh the plugin to get those changes, you can just click reload properties. All right, and my last point is about Zoom as a whole, which was that it was built to be hybrid. So it provides the seamless integration between the cloud and on-premise resources. So if you have a remote user who needs to access media that's on premises, they can do that through Zoom as though they're in the office. They don't have to think about it. They don't have to know where the media is stored. Zoom figures it out for them. And deploying more resources or changing your strategy in the future is very easy because Zoom is scalable and flexible to completely change things up if you want, or if your business needs change, it can adapt to it. And our Adobe plugins fit perfectly into this hybrid workflow because they allow the creatives to just do their work, and Zoom does the rest in the background. So that is it. Thank you very much for joining us. Appreciate you joining us for this webinar. If you have any questions, please make them using the Q&A function of the webinar app. We'll stick around for a few minutes to answer those questions. So yeah, thank you.
Evan, thank you so much for the plugin, excuse me, the plugin overview. And Carl, thank you so much for the Adobe Productions overview. I've actually got a couple of questions here, Evan, that have popped up on my screen. And folks, if you have any additional questions, please send them off to us, and we'll do our very best to answer them for you right now. Evan, when you were talking about the collaboration workflow, there's a question from Sarah. Does Zoom actually keep track of all of the comments, that people are making when they're collaborating?
Yeah, so those comments are always stored in Zoom, so you can always go back to them. So if let's say you've uploaded a new version and resolved a bunch of comments, but maybe one comment was forgotten, for example, in Zoom, you can go through and review the past comments that are unresolved and actually copy them to the new version so everyone has an up-to-date to-do list. So, or if, 2 months from now you're wondering, hey, I thought I told them to do this and they ignored my comment or whatever. You can actually go through in Zoom and view all of the past comments to see if anything fell through the cracks or to see what was said. So it's a nice record of that conversation that never goes away.
Okay. I have another question for you from Paul. Paul asked a question. Can you talk a little more about how permissions are distributed in the system? How would you restrict, for example, assets at the asset level?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so in Zoom, permissions are controlled. Let me see if I can end this slideshow. Yeah, I'll do this slide. Okay, so in Zoom, access permissions are based on a root level, what we call root level project vaults. So you can see in this image, we've got Modern Globetrotters is the root level project vault. And so that means that anyone who's been granted access to this project vault is going to be able to do to files in it what their role dictates they can do. So if they have a read-only role, they can only read files, they can't change them. You can have a role that can't delete files, things like that. If you have multiple vaults and you haven't added certain users to those other vaults, they aren't even going to see them. So when they log into Zoom, either in the web client, our desktop app, or in the plugins, they're only going to see those vaults that they've been given access to. So we have one customer with a lot of different departments, and a few of those departments work on top secret projects a few times per year. And so they have a separate project vault for those secret projects so that people can't even see them. And the users have only been granted access to that who need to see them. And that permission model is carried all the way through Zoom. So if, and any feature in Zoom is going to have that permission check first to make sure people accessing media can access what they've been allowed to access.
Evan, thank you. There's another question for you. You mentioned Proxy Workflow was available in Premiere, but this person wants to know, is it available with After Effects?
Actually, I think it is, yes. I think you get the same proxy switching screen, browse. This same proxy switching screen is available in After Effects. Yeah, my apologies for mentioning that or not mentioning that. The video proxies can be swapped in either app. Okay. One thing though to note is that the proxies do not preserve alpha channels though. So if you are using a file with an alpha channel in After Effects, then when you switch the proxy, because it's an MP4 and MP4s don't have alphas, that might be something to work around. But other than that, it totally works.
Evan, you were a moment ago, you were talking about some upcoming improvements to our Resolve links capabilities. Have you got any thoughts on how those new improvements will impact InDesign files?
Yeah, they'll impact them exactly the same way. So in InDesign or any of the other apps, you know, we keep track of the linked files used in the project. What we've been working very closely with Adobe to improve this Resolve Link workflow, because it's kind of a balance between how the Adobe apps stores its links and then how Zoom stores its links. And so what we've had to do is work with how Adobe stores it one way and then store it in our way a different way. And essentially what we're doing is tracking the asset IDs per project at a much more granular level. So even if the file is in a weird location somewhere, as long as Zoom knows its asset ID, it can go grab it. So the Resolve Links workflow is going to be a lot more granular and a lot more powerful based on those asset IDs and the links stored in the project. So it's going to apply to all of the Adobe apps that we have plugins for, including InDesign.
That's great, thank you. Last question for you. What platforms can you publish to?
Yeah, good question. So we can publish to any platform that you want, as long as there's a way to talk to it. So for example, we have customers publishing to Brightcove video platform. We use the Brightcove API. We have customers who have their own internal CMS that they publish to, and we export metadata that CMS can take the file and get its metadata for. You can publish to social media right from Zoom. And there's a few ways to do it. In Zoom, we have a job workflow where you can create templates to send the file somewhere based on a couple pieces of information. And then we also have a Zapier integration, which allows publishing based on, for example, a metadata change. So you could change the file to have a metadata mark as published to Facebook, and then Zapier will take the file and publish it to Facebook for you. The nice thing about using Zapier is you don't have to be a computer programmer to create that workflow. You can just go in and log in at any time. So short story version is we can publish anywhere as long as the place has an API or a way to send it files. We can do it.
Evan, another question. This one's around AI, and it's a double-barreled question.
Okay.
First part of it is, you know, which AI providers do we work with? Mm-hmm. But the second part of the question is this: is the AI feature set that we were describing using a proprietary AI set, or is it leveraging AWS AI or even something else?
Yeah, so we can integrate with any AI provider that you use. So if you already use AWS or Veritone or you know, Microsoft Azure or what have you, we can integrate with it. Our AI engine is very configurable to use any API that is necessary. Any provider you want, we can. We also have partnerships too. So if you don't already have an AI provider, we can work with you to get one for you. And we also have the built-in feature of including AI analysis on images up to a certain amount if you want that service. But for video, you know, we work with you to find a provider, since video providers are, you know, the AI services do different things sometimes. So it's all about figuring out what your needs are and what capabilities you need, and then finding the provider that does it for you.
Evan, thank you for the responses to those questions. Carl, thank you again for joining the webinar. We've come to the end of the webinar, and I genuinely want to thank everybody who's taken the time this morning to listen to this material. Have a really good day and stay safe. Thank you so much.